Hey, good Thursday morning, everybody. Welcome into the DFS Minute brought to you by DFSArmy.com, your one stop shop for all things daily fantasy sports, all tools, all coaching covered for one price. DFSArmy.com. I'm content editor, senior contributor, and coach here inside the Army. And today we're going to talk golf. I want to show you a little bit about manipulating the optimizer, generating some leverage, kind of the concept behind it. Of course, it's a very, very personalized um, thing in that you are going to have different ideas than I am, and that's okay. That's actually encouraged. But what I want to show you, we get questions about how are we generating leverage? How are we doing this? How are we doing that? And I want to at least show you how I've been doing it lately. It's been a lot of fun, and it is a hell of a lot of fun to do in MME type situations on the cheap for quarters and dimes, and in some case nickels and stuff like that. And it's a good way to practice your game, your overall game, so that when you do play your other, you might already be laddering with the bulk of what you do in, dollar, $2, $5, $10 contests. But if you want to learn the MME game a little bit, of course, you plug into some of our coaching, you read some of the process articles, etc. Those will help you with NBA. We're developing these concepts for other sports. But what you're going to end up finding is it helps you in your other game too, because it helps teach you to manipulate the optimizer. And the optimizer today is literally what the HUD was to online poker 10, 15 years ago. Everybody has one, everybody's using one, and if you don't have one, you're kind of at a disadvantage to the field if you don't have access to one. You don't have to rely on them, you can still hand build, but if you don't know what these optimizers are doing to the majority of your player pool, your competition, then you don't know how to exploit them. And so the first thing that I would do when I dive into our optimizer here at DFSArmy.com is I set it up pretty naked. If I'm on DraftKings, I'll play 20 lineups. There's nothing wrong with if you know that they're going to open another contest and another one and another one. You can MME those. You can MME 5 separate 20 max contests with 100 lineups. I mean, quick tip for you there. Happens all the time in hockey and baseball and whatnot to take down those top prizes. But if you're just going to play 20 lineups, because you're either on a budget or you don't really want to blow up a full 50, 150 lineups, whatever, then jump in with 20 lineups, a couple of unique players. You can spread way out if you want to and have a bunch of different lineups and really cover some bases, or you can tighten up your core. When you're only playing 10, 20, 30 lineups or so, I would tend to keep my core tighter than if I was playing a full 150 where I really want to spread out and cover a lot of bases. So I'm going to use two things. I'm going to use uniques to control the size of my core. The fewer uniques that I use, the tighter my core, and the more similar my lineups are going to be from top to bottom. And randomization. The more random I make my lineups, the more it's going to spread out. If I use no randomization, it's going to be highly focused on optimal, the not optimal projections, because I mean it's freaking golf, man. Nothing's optimal, but more, it's going to be tightly adhered to the actual projections. Whereas the randomizer, and people do ask this too, what is the randomizer? Take a guy like Rory McIlroy, projected at 91.071 points, and if you think that's any different than 92.345, you're nuts. 90-ish points is about where we're at with Rory. So if I set this randomizer to 10%, then I'm going to get a range of points on each run of the optimizer, run 1, run 2, run 3, run 4. I'm going to get a different projection for Rory, ranging between 99, which is 9 points or 10% of 90, 99 points, or 9 points less, 81. So anywhere between 81, 82, 82 and a half, 87, 91, 90, 86, 83.7, whatever. That's what is going to generate as I run the optimizer 20 times. It's going to give me a different projection for Rory each time. And that's going to sometimes bring his value up a little bit and make him important, and sometimes lower his value a little bit, make him less important, which might allow somebody else. Rory goes down all the way to the bottom end of his 10% range, and Jon Rahm comes all the way up to the 10% of his range, and all of a sudden Rahm gets pulled into that lineup and Rory gets dropped, and that's how it shifts and mixes and matches those lineups for you. So what I'm wanting to show you is how to run that basic situation and then come back to the optimizer. So if I have just two uniques, no randomness set, and I scroll down here and take a look at some of my players. I've got 90% Griffin, 70% Lando, Brandt Snedeker, Ryan Palmer, Russell Knox, etc. This is kind of my core. This is what the domination station is telling me my core is going to be. Now I might go back for 20 lineups and say I don't want anybody in more than say 50% of them. So I changed this to where nobody's going to be in more than 50%. And if I run it again, it'll spread out a little bit. But what I already know is some of these ownership projections. And what I'm going to try and do is figure out who the chalk is. So Rory McIlroy is going to be pretty chalky. Doesn't look like anybody else right now, but if I scroll up here to projected ownership and sort by that, I see Rory and Rahm and Hideki, Woodland. You know, these guys, we're not as chalky here, you know, as we are up here. So I can actually decide whether or not I want to believe that with Rory or not. If I believe it and I want to keep him the same, I would just take Rory and set him at 25%, right around that 24% mark, right? And I would take Jon Rahm and set him at about 20%. But if I wanted to go underweight on Rory, because in golf fading the chalk is always a good way to generate leverage, I would maybe cut my exposure in half to say 15% or 10%. I mean, or, you know, 12% if you want. And I would do the same to Rahm, you know, and whatever. And that would allow some of these other guys to jump in to the mix, because it would run, what, 10% is 2 lineups out of 20 that would have Rahm in them, and poof, he'd be done. He wouldn't be used anymore, and it would be, the optimizer would be forced to grab other guys and bring them in. Now, if I wanted to do the opposite of that, and I wanted to come all the way up to, you know, even more of these guys, then I can do a couple of different things. And let me show you on a lower owned guy how I might do that. Like a Lanto Griffins, he's in 90% of my lineups. That's whatever, that's fine. Somebody who didn't pull into a lot of my lineups. Let's say we really like, well, I would have liked to have found a strong name down in here. But let's just take Rory Sabatini for shits and giggles. And let's say I wanted to get him into 50%. He's projected at 7. I want to go way overweight the field, get him in 30, 40, 50% of my lineups. I can do this by 2 ways. I can force him into my lineups, 50%, as a minimum exposure. That's one thing that's actually fairly unique to DFS Army right now. You can force in those minimum projections. I can do that, you know, even with Denny McCarthy, put him in 10%. I can put Harris English in 5% of my lineups if I want. It doesn't really matter, you know, what number I choose, as long as I have a goal, I have a plan. But say with Rory, I, you know, want him up in 50%, I can just force him into 50%, or I can doctor his projection. If he's at 25% right now, I can come up here to Rory Sabatini. If I want, I can search, and I can use the like, love, and adore, and I can boost his projection 10%, 15%, whatever. If I boost it 10%, it comes up from 58 to 69. That's a DFSA grade. 58 to 64. Sorry, 58 to 64. That's your 10%. But remember, if I wanted to even further randomize this by 10%, now I can get another boost on top of him too, and take that all the way up to 10% again, another 6 points to 70 points. So he's going to be running anywhere between 58 and 70 points. And he's going to mix in at a cap of 50% of the time. I can put the full Adore on him and boost him 15%. He goes up to 67, and this will do the same thing. Or I can just take the number myself and just throw it through the roof. It will get him to 50% at this point. Because what I'm doing with these projections is I'm changing the value, the points per dollar of the player. If I come back to his original projection of 58, watch his number change. 8.06 is his points per dollar right now. But if I make him the most valuable guy on the slate, make him 100 points, he goes to 13. This optimizer is going to see that number and go, holy crap, he's a value. You got to put him everywhere. And that's fine. Once it gets to half my lineups, it's going to say, whoop, there's a cap on him. Now I can't use him anymore. So there are ways to do this, okay? And the trick behind that right now, the trick behind that number is, if you're wanting him to just force him in, you'd use a minimum, or you'd throw his projection through the roof and then cap him, which is what I'm doing. But if you wanted him to mix in a little bit more organically, so that he's not in the first 10 of your 20 lineups and then not in any of the last 10 of your lineups, and this is where the real art to these optimizers comes into play, you would boost his projection slowly. You would come up 5%. And then you would come up, maybe if it didn't pull him into 50% of your lineups, you'd come up 10%. Run it again. If it still didn't work, 15%. Run it again. Because what you want is, you want him naturally mixing in. You want the player that you're targeting to kind of come into the lineups out of 20 lineups, 3, 5, 11, 12, 15, 17, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you want that because you're going to mix and match all these other players around him too, and that's going to give you a little bit more even distribution as opposed to having all of my favorites in the first 10 lineups and then all of my junk. And it's you always heard the stars and scrubs or studs and scrubs approach. That's kind of what you're doing with MME lineups when you really, really, really jerk with forced exposures and playing with projections and all that kind of stuff. You're really kind of going stars and scrubs to where you're identifying your stars as the players that you really, really like, and the scrubs are everybody else. And the top half of your lineups are going to end up with all your stars, and the bottom half going to end up with all your scrubs. You're not going to get a very good mix, which is not really what you want. You want that mix to get a few stars in there, and then next lineup a few different stars, and the next lineup a few different stars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of more of the goal, and that's where this becomes an art. And yes, it takes time. It takes run after run after run after run. I can sit here in NBA and I can run 20 different optimizers or 20 different runs in the optimizer and spend a half hour or more doing this, or an hour or more doing this, and then news breaks, and then I have to go back and do it again, and the news. I'm not changing my exposures. I already know what I like in those guys. I already know which ones I want to be overweight the field on. But I have to adjust for maybe news breaking and what that's going to do to their ownership. This guy all of a sudden become a value? Is this guy all of a sudden going to become chalky? Does that mean that I want to come down off the guy, or does that mean that I have to go from 40% to 70% to stay overweight the field? What does that mean? These are the kinds of things that you have to think about while you're assembling your lineups. And that's the stuff that separates the good from the great players. Anybody can run 20 lineups. Anybody can click optimize and have competitive lineups. It's fine. If you don't have a lot of time, we're set up for you too. But if you have the time, you have the desire to dig into things like coaches' notes, set your core, put a bunch of hearts on those guys, pick a few of the 5-star, 4-star guys, put some hearts on those guys, maybe put some frowny faces on them and drive them out of your projections, whatever, and manipulate these player pools yourself. Or go one step further and dive into the research station and start looking at things like, here's good course history here for Gary Woodland and some decent recent form. So I know that Gary Woodland isn't being touted super high, 4 stars, appealing game, 4 straight top sevens. It's not a real ball busting promotion or tout of this player. It's just kind of like, yeah, he's good, but it's not like my favorite play on the slate. Well, maybe it is your favorite play on the slate because maybe you see this recent history and the course history and the recent form and some of the statistics, and you go, well, holy crap, he's only going to be 20% owned. So is, Hideki Matsuyama or whatever. Well, if more people are going to be on, say, Rory McIlroy, maybe I take Gary Woodland instead and I bump him up to 40% and I drop Rory down to 10%. These are the manipulations that you make, and these are the ways that you use your own brain, your own confidence, your own knowledge, your own research to decide and take some hard stands in these tournaments. And this is when you don't just rely on the machine and duplicate your lineups with everybody else. You're manipulating these machines a little bit to where you're now getting unique mixes of these lineups. And this is how you find yourself, when it works for you, this is how you find yourself atop the leaderboard. Is it going to work all the time? No. Golf is a very volatile sport. Don't expect it to work most of the time, but do expect it to pay you when it does work. That's all you're really trying to do. I don't have to, if I have, you know, uh, some kind of a contest where I can turn a quarter into $100. I mean, what do I get? 400 entries? I mean, if I win it once out of 400 times, I'm breaking even. If I win it more often than that, I'm profiting. And that's not even counting all of the other little mini cashes along the way. So my goal is to get to where I make a serious run at it. What, at 400 lineups, 20 at a time is what, like 20 shots, right? 20 weeks. So about once every 6 months, it'd be nice to have something go deep in these tournaments. If so, I'm on the right track. If all my other lineups are min cashing and missing the cash, but once every 6 months or about 2 times a year, I have one of those weeks where one of my lineups busts through and goes deep in those tournaments, then I'm just as good as anybody else in these contests. I'm not a schlep. I'm not a fish. I'm having good luck and I'm having bad luck along the way. God forbid I run a tight core, and this is what we're studying with these optimizers is getting into these tighter cores so that you can punch several lineups through and get them deep into the contest. Now you do have an edge over the field, a significant edge. That's what we teach you how to do inside DFSArmy.com through tools like these. If you like the video, you like what we're talking about, like and subscribe, ring the notification bell, turn those on. Come inside DFS Army and check us out, dfsarmy.com. The link will be down there in the comments section. Use the coupon code CHOP, C-H-O-P, for a 20% discount every single month that you remain a member. And we're getting ready with NASCAR. Tennis is under its first major right now with the Australian Open. Our tennis coaches are great. Our members are doing great. And baseball's coming. I mean, we're getting ready to just rock and roll all year long inside the Daily Fantasy Sports Arena. And we would love to have you come learn games with us if that is what you want to do. Click those links, get inside, say hi once you come in there. I'd love to know where you came from. And I wish you all a great golf week. We'll talk to you on the other side. Take care.